I think we're going. All right, so the plan is I'm going to start. And Al's going to say, Al and Bob will speak. We have a few other speakers. And if there's any questions or comments, please feel free to speak up. My name is Mike Murwicki, and I am the Southern Vermont Coordinator for Vermont Interfaith Action. We are living in tender times right now. We're also living in reactionary times. And after hearing Al speak at the Legislative Social Equity Caucus about the Declaration of Inclusion, I felt like this was one way we could get involved. We could bring people together to affirm our values and also to stand up against various forms of oppression that prevent Vermont from being more inclusive and more welcoming. As we start this campaign to bring the Declaration of Inclusion to towns in Windham County, to churches, to civic groups, to have that process of declaring our values and then having conversations. And subsequently, what does that mean? Our hope is that we can come together and make Vermont even more welcoming than it is, and especially for all people who have not experienced welcome and inclusion here. So to introduce the declaration, I'm going to pass it over to Al and Bob, Al Wakefield and Bob Harnish. Thank you, Al and Bob.
All right. I think I'm going to go first, and thank you for that beautiful introduction, Mike. As I said in my introduction, I've been here since 1964 when I bought a business in the ski industry in Killington. And after I moved there, I learned from some of the long-term residents that my grandfather had been an interim pastor in Sherburne around 1950. So, and he spent some of his career as a director of a settlement house. Now that's a term we don't use anymore. I'm not sure, but it would be called maybe social work today of some sort. And working with immigrants and others who could not find a place in society. And I too have always felt empathy for people in marginalized groups. More recently, I was very moved by the death of John Lewis, Representative John Lewis, and his efforts at bringing forth civil rights in all its ramifications. And then there was the death of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and Trayvon Martin and others who we all know about. And then about that time, I learned of the concept of Declaration of Inclusion from my cousin, who was chair of the select board in Franklin, where they had adopted it, and they had adopted it as just because they learned about it from someone else, and he offered to send me the wording. And I was so intrigued by that because it just seemed like the right thing to do, the morally right thing to do. And I gathered it, I presented it actually to the town of Pittsford, and it was adopted there, and then it was adopted by Brandon. And I thought, well, this may have some legs. And so I formed a team of a few people, well, actually of Al mostly, and then we added a few more people. So there's a total of 5 of us working more or less non-stop and unpaid, just because we just so believe in the concept of inclusion. And the concept as being the right thing to do. And then about a year ago, the results of the 2020 census became public. And we learned that not only is the population of Vermont aging, but it's dwindling, or it's barely growing. I think it grew 10%. It grew 2% in 10 years, and some areas like Rutland County actually lost population. And what does that mean? I mean, it means that as a state, Vermont will have, unless we do something, Vermont will have fewer people of working age, but still the same infrastructure and the same services that need to be supported. And so, so then I realized, well, economically, having Vermont be a more diverse state is the right thing from that point of view as well. I mean, as we know, the United States is the most diverse country in the world, having welcomed and adopted people from all over the world, and it's also the most economically successful. And looking just here in Vermont, we have Chittenden County, also the most diverse and the most dynamic in terms of its economy. We don't want Vermont to keep moving in the wrong direction. We have to let the world know that we welcome people of all sorts. We welcome diversity, and we think it's the right thing to do, and economically the smart thing to do. So where are we in our efforts to have all towns in Vermont adopt a declaration of inclusion? Well, for that, I want to turn it over to my colleague, Al Wakefield. Al?
Thanks, Bob. Bob is very much an inspiration to all of us. Got us started on this, and as I said earlier, I've known Bob for a lot of years. Bob was very much involved with getting the first woman into Rotary locally, and asked me to join. I didn't join until, in fact, they had accepted the first woman who eventually became the president of Rutland Rotary. That having been said, we will follow Bob wherever he goes. We're now 5 people, and I say we've got one Gentile in Bob. We've got one Jew in Norm Cohen. We've got one middle-aged female in Liz Weinman, and one very young lady, part of the Millennium Group as well. So we're kind of diverse in our little organization as well. We started a year ago, as Bob said, and now just about a year later, there are just under 40 towns, plus the Lamoille Planning Commission, that have adopted a declaration of inclusion. Burlington, interestingly, we started a year ago trying to convince them that this was the right thing to do, the smart thing to do, and they just adopted a week ago. In which there's a vote tonight in Clarendon, which might get us to 40. Our goal is to get to 50 by Inclusion Week, which is the second week in May. Inclusion Week is a result of a proclamation by the governor. When we wrote to the governor's office telling him about the Declaration of Inclusion Initiative, they responded slowly, but they responded, and they responded very affirmatively. They, in fact, set into motion a proclamation for the Declaration of Inclusion, and also designated the second week in May as Inclusion Week. And the 2 proclamations are very extensive, very comprehensive, and modeled after the original Declaration of Inclusion, which Bob brought forth. Most communities have adopted the Declaration of Inclusion as we recommended, but some have tailored it to their own situation, their own unique situation. We've said that while we think what we've done is expresses the commitment that we want towns to take and to act on, it really becomes even more important when towns say, well, we've got a unique situation here and we'd like to do this a little bit differently. And for the most part, what they've done has been very, very much along the lines of what we developed, certainly encompassing the spirit as well as the intent of the original Declaration of Inclusion. And so we're 10 off from our goal of next in another month and a week or so. We think we'll get there, but if we don't, we'll continue to press on, because our goal for the next 360 days is another 50 towns. So 100 towns by May of 2023. And if we do that, we'll have a sizable part of Vermont's population that it will have adopted. The first piece of the Declaration of Inclusion is adoption. The second piece is implementation. And words are, anybody can say stuff, but it's really the proof is what you do about it. And so we've issued some guidelines. We have a website, vermontdeclarationofinclusion.org, given to us by the Vermont Chamber of Commerce. And we update that as towns do adopt, and as we learn more about what towns are doing to implement. And so we're sharing ideas between towns and between people and select boards and all that, with the hope that towns will be motivated to adopt and to implement. We don't know what the governor's planning. We've been told he's planning something for implementation week. We've encouraged him to recognize those towns that have adopted, to challenge the rest of Vermont's towns to adopt, and giving them some ideas of what they can do, with the overshadowing concept that growth, financial growth, economic growth is really dependent on Vermont being known as a welcoming place where all kinds of people can come and go, achieve their professional, personal goals, prosper, feel safe, and move on with their lives in a very, very happy way. So that's in brief what we've been doing. Working, as Bob said, without pay, but we get a tremendous psychic reward for what's happening throughout Vermont. And this is today just an indication of that.
Sure. Thank you so much, Al and Bob. I got off track a little bit with our schedule here, and we wanted to start with a land acknowledgement from Reverend Lise Sparrow. So when this gets edited and put on television, that will be what we start with. So I'm going to go ask Lisa now if she'd like to share that land acknowledgement.
You don't want to just, you really want me to do it?
I do, because when we edit this, we will start with that.
Okay. All right. So imagine that we are just starting the meeting. And this is with my NAACP hat on, this is really to put what we're talking about in context, that none of these issues that we're declaring are new. And I've been learning how to write a proper land acknowledgement with a Sakoki teacher. And that basically is a way to respect the fact that the tradition of a land acknowledgement is a Native American tradition. And I have some Native American blood, but this is in that school. And I just want to note that it is a Native American thing. And in the NAACP, we're really trying to have the I in BIPOC be visible, and to also acknowledge that these are not issues that began even with slavery, that there's been a lot of conflict among races and among peoples for millennia, and that our fight is part of a much longer arc. So this is something written for today, and that's the way these are supposed to be done. So and it is also out of a faith tradition that we want to include in our work at Vermont Interfaith Action. So if you would mind, I'll just read it for us. I just encourage you to relax and remember the day and the earth that we are sitting in and on. Sister Snowdrops, greet us. Brother Forsythia is showing his buds. Brother Ibegtegwa, the wild goose, and Brother Quigwagam, the duck, have returned to the wetlands. Sisters Tideso, the blue jay, and Cho Glesqua, finch, and Kakasikwatsit, the bluebird, hear each other in the bushes and trees. The waning crescent moon, Wapikunulkam, leaves the river free of ice. We thank the rich valley, the Wolhanak, for all the healing which comes from the waters of the snow in the bright days before us. We recognize that for thousands and thousands of years, the ancestors enjoyed and cared for this place that they and we call home. The Nohegan, Kawasik, Elnu, and Missisqua shared the fish and waters, the hunting grounds and shelter of the Askaskwikwigwek, Adenak, the Green Mountains. Today, we also acknowledge the loss of land and life, of language and culture, losses of hope and possibility, losses brought about by illness and violence, by ignorance and invasion. We mourn the wisdom lost and show respect for the wisdom still present among us and with us, in our elders and their families. And we claim our hope today that we might work together in ways which heal and reconcile, which celebrate and live out the many traditions of our communities, that in Dakana, the people of the Long River, may all be honored once again. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Lisa. At this point, I'm going to ask Reverend Debbie Ingram, who's the Executive Director of Vermont Interfaith, if she would care to share some words about today's event and Vermont Interfaith Action.
Yes, thank you, Mike, and thank you everybody for having me. I am Debbie Ingram, as Mike said. I'm a United Church of Christ ordained minister, and I've been the Executive Director of Vermont Interfaith Action for 15 years now. And VIA is a coalition of over 70 member and affiliated congregations of many different faiths. We have 4 professional organizers based in 5 different regions, but we also extend to other parts of the state through our affiliated congregations. And our membership encompasses about 16,000 Vermonters. And our mission is to focus on trying to affect systemic change around issues of social justice. So we, instead of giving direct assistance to people in need, which many of our congregations do independently, which is, of course, extremely important work. But our focus is on trying to figure out the root causes of why people are in need and to affect change in the very systems that are causing their need. And so over the years, we have been able to make inroads on issues like affordable housing and on healthcare, both at the state level and the national level. We have a group that has made some changes in our corrections system around what we call a moral economy to try to raise the minimum wage for workers and affect better treatment for them. And then various opportunities for youth, including education, changing our education system for former refugee youth in the Burlington, Winooski areas. And VIA also is very fortunate in that we belong to a national network called Faith in Action, which includes about 20 different states and some international chapters as well. And about 10 years ago, Faith in Action started to focus on the racial situation in our country. And we made a very intentional change to make awareness training, particularly for the white people who were involved in the network, a part of everything that we did when we gathered together, and to really center our justice work on race and on the inequity around race in our country, realizing that every issue of social justice is really worse for people of color than it is for white folks. And so the way that this change and this very intentional focus has manifested in Vermont is that we have encouraged our congregations to respond. As Bob was saying, so many of us were just horrified by what we saw after the death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Philando Castile and so many people of color. And then we were galvanized and inspired by the Black Lives Matter movement and what we saw as a groundswell of support for greater justice around race in our country. And so a lot of people in our congregations did some book studies and some discussion groups and really raising their awareness and their understanding. And then they really felt that they were ready to take some action. They didn't want to just talk about things. They wanted to actually, take some real concrete steps. And so that's what we've been doing over about the last year. We've really had a lot of energy around particularly three different campaigns, grassroots campaigns. One is around economic opportunities for people of color in business and in housing and land ownership. Another one of our groups is working on racial justice in public safety and reimagining what that would look like. And then we are excited about the possibility of passing Proposition 2, which will amend the Vermont Constitution to abolish slavery unequivocally. And so we've centered our work around those three campaigns. But we were very excited. I was very excited when Mike, who's new to VIA, but has already made such great contributions to our organization, when he came, to me and said, "There's this wonderful man named Al Wakefield, and he's got 4 great partners, and they are working on this great idea called the Declaration of Inclusion, and trying to get municipalities across the state to sign on to it, to adopt it, but then also to figure out how best to implement it at a grassroots level." And that works, that aligns so well with our model, which is very grassroots oriented, which is very relational and which is very methodical in making change and taking small steps, manageable portions of issues, and then really making a strong impact on them. And so we are looking forward to helping to spread the word about the Declaration of Inclusion, to hopefully figuring out ways that we can collaborate with all of you on the 3 issues that I mentioned that we've already started taking up around racial justice. And we really are looking forward to being effective allies in this struggle to make our world a better place, and to make Vermont a more equitable and just and compassionate state for everyone. And so again, thank you very much for having me today, and we look forward to working with you well into the future on this.
Thank you so much, Debbie, and thanks for that background on Vermont Interfaith. I am going to ask Catie G Berg of Dummerston to share some words next, but I'm also going to mute everyone so we don't have background noises. Catie.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted now. And let me just get in here now. So I've had the good fortune to live in a community that supports its residents with social, civic, faith-based, academic, and service groups. And one heartening expression of support came as a non-binding resolution at Dummerston's town meeting on March 6th in 2018, whereby the people of Dummerston resolved to strive as a compassionate community to understand others' views and to relieve the suffering of others in our town. So that's some history. And then one organization that I especially value is Dummerston Cares, a group of volunteers whose mission is to provide helping hands for our neighbors. And as a member of Dummerston Cares Board of Trustees, I recently helped to adopt a declaration of inclusion that proclaims, Dummerston Cares welcomes all persons, regardless of race, color, religion, national origin, sex, gender identity or expression, age, disability, or economic status. We reject discrimination in all forms and commit to fair and equal treatment of everyone in our community. We value respectful civic engagement in all forums. And another board member of Dummerston Cares, the Reverend Sean Bracebridge, is the pastor of the Dummerston Congregational Church. And he realized that Dummerston Cares' Declaration of Inclusion was similar to the mission of the Dummerston Church. And the trustees of the church recently voted on a resolution to fully support Dummerston Cares' Declaration of Inclusion. A trustee said that they can make a public endorsement of Dummerston Cares' Declaration of Inclusion at an upcoming congregational meeting. So I think that we citizens of Vermont are forming a melting pot of society. And some have lived here for generations and have strong traditions tied to culture and place. Others have chosen Vermont more recently and bring their own traditions and culture. And my family's experience of moving here nearly 20 years ago is a hybrid experience. My spouse was returning to a state where his grandparents were dairy farmers 100 years earlier. Part of our family's heritage comes from traditional Vermont that dared people to broaden their experiences out of state. Much of that tradition called my family back to an enterprising and authentic society that values fairness and support for each other when in need. And when we see neighbors who need fair treatment and opportunity, I think that we all rise when we help our neighbors rise. So I'm honored to support a Declaration of Inclusion as a reminder of Vermont's culture of fairness. Thank you for listening.
Well, thank you, Catie. And thanks for bringing that to these other organizations as well. We want to keep spreading the good word. Next, I'd like to introduce Guy Wood, representing the Brattleboro area Jewish community.
Welcome. I've had good conversations with the board of the BAJC, and as a former board member and former president, they think I could do this. I'm glad to support me, as well as the Rabbi Jeman. Maybe some things to share. What brings me here? One is that Judaism has a commitment to justice in a full sense of the word, not a revengeful sense of the word. There's quotes from Isaiah, and that's in that. On a personal level, as a college freshman, I was shocked by what I was seeing happen, and that made me get on a bus to go to Selma, Alabama on the last couple of days of the march. And I went there to support what they were doing, but I've always felt like I was given a tremendous gift that I benefited far more than my being there. It benefited me far more than it benefited them. It's just a feeling, but I think it does recognize the issue that that we're not free until we're all free. To share with you, my dad was a AFL-CIO construction worker around St. Louis in my teens. And they had a grandfather clause, which meant that I could be a cement finisher as long as my dad was, which was just an example of how policies hold, in this case, racism in place. Blacks couldn't get out of the labor. They were laborers, but they couldn't get into a journeyman position. Just to share, a couple of years later in college, I read in the New York Times that the Berkeley City Council had come out, this is 1968, had come out against the war, Vietnam War, and they were criticized for it. And their response was, let's see if I get the quote right, that to be concerned only about the streets and sewers of our city and not the lives of our young men seems like a limitation on what we're about in a better world. So I think of municipalities, to me, that it's about people and making our lives work. Trying to think of anything else to share. Just a final comment. When I read the Declaration, what occurred to me was that it was a commitment against all oppressions and the ways we can identify them. And it makes me glad to support it. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Guy, and thank you for that personal sharing. It's quite apparent you're continuing that work from long ago today, so thanks. Next, I'd like to ask the Reverend Lise Sparrow to share some remarks.
Oh, hi, everybody. Most of you know me, so I think I'll just talk a little bit about the work of the NAACP and how it might partner with the work of Vermont Interfaith Action and the Declaration of Inclusion. I'm a big believer, as many of you know, in working together and have it as a way of really having a synergy that's greater than the sum of the parts. The NAACP is the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And I think the definition of who those colored people are has really shifted in time. And it's historically been an organization that has worked with Jewish brothers and sisters and with many faith communities. It's part of its long tradition. And so the Religious Affairs Department, which is the part that I'm overseeing is one that has a long historical basis and I think has a lot of relevance and to bring. I just wanted to talk a little bit about why I'm here and why I'm encouraging this as a tool within our community. Over the last year, I've sat in on the Social Equity Caucus at the legislature for our state government and have been in a position, thanks mostly to Mike, to help problem solve things that have happened in Putney in particular, also in Guilford. And the NAACP tries to become sort of a mediator. And in those situations, I felt it was really important to have someone outside the problem come in and help work through the issues. There's also opportunities for advocacy, with some of these different bills that Debbie mentioned. If the NAACP signs on, I think that gives it a little bit more cachet. So we're in a position to do that, although not always, because I think we tend to try to be very discerning about where we partner. There's another effort, which is the Charter for Compassion, and that is another one that we've been supporting. But I think the Declaration of Inclusion has sort of Vermont roots and also a special relevancy. And I see it, and I like to support it because it's a preemptive act. I think it's not running after the problem after it's already happened. It's bringing people together before there's maybe in the context of things that have not maybe worked right, but to really talk about values and about who we each want, what we want our communities to be. It can be very inspiring and uplifting, and people who think they didn't agree may agree. And I just would like to put that out as something that I think is particularly powerful for communities to do. And I'm hoping that many of the communities in Windham County will take it up. And certainly the NAACP is there to support you if you do. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Lisa, and thanks to everybody for being here. At this point, I wanted to ask if anybody who hadn't spoken had any questions for any of us, but especially Al and Bob, who are the originators of this, or any comments as to what you've heard. Julie, we're going on the auction action here. So if you just scratched your nose, that means you bought a painting. So, or did you want to ask a question? Well, thanks, everybody. Al, one thing I did want to ask, we've got the Declaration of Inclusion, and I think Catie has given a good example of how it can be amended for different areas. But is this a one-off? What's next after we sign the declaration? What would you like to see happen after we get these towns to sign on?
Sure, appreciate that question. We talked a bit about the implementation phase, the declaration being in two sections, one being voting to adopt, if you will, by the town, the select board, town management, city council, whatever that governmental institution is. And the second part being implementing, and that means developing programs, policies, procedures, etc., in each town to support the meaning of the declaration. And very specifically, we have, on the implementation piece that we put together, we've said there's the quick and easy, there's the in-depth implementation, and there's the sustaining or ongoing implementation phase. And just I won't go into a lot of detail, but the quick and easy is add the declaration to your town website. That's very simple to do. Print the declaration in the town newsletter. Include information as well as the declaration in the town's annual report and whatever other communications the town sends out. That can be done immediately, and some towns have gone and done that really, really quickly. Among the towns that have moved very, very quickly, Milton, which I talked about in an earlier meeting, and Middlebury. Middlebury went immediately. In fact, they included their implementation right in their Declaration of Inclusion, the piece that they adopted. The second piece, in-depth implementation, put together a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee. Arrange for implicit bias training for city and town management staff. Brainstorm with other towns, ideas, creative ideas to reach out to marginalized groups and individuals and new arrivals to make them feel at home. Task the committee with researching, gathering, and overseeing the most effective ideas. I think those two things go along together. We talked earlier in a meeting about Milton sharing what it's doing, for instance, during Inclusion Week with other towns, and we're using, in a sense, Milton as an example of a town that has moved very, very aggressively and is doing some things, not just cosmetic, but very real, because they've done some training things as well. Urge local schools, not-for-profit organizations, companies, corporations to adopt a statement of inclusion and offer bias training. So those are things which, when you start to get into it, when you start to really think about what is it you do to make meaningful change in your community, this really begins to get into the heart of that. The third phase is ongoing implementation. Work with school administrations to bring inclusion and diversity into the classroom, into various classes such as art, poetry, drama, the debate club, the stage, the musicians piece of it. You can talk about inclusion in almost any piece of it and of a school, and make it a meaningful effort. Work with faith leaders such as yourselves in the community to guide their congregations to embrace community diversity as a human and humane way to treat our fellow citizens. Engage the town library director to arrange seminars, workshops, all the things that libraries do to engage their public, to get them to include inclusion, if you will, as a part of that effort. Create a concierge type service to assist new people in moving into your town. You might call it a meet and greet if you want. Some of you probably know the Vermont Partnership, Curtis Reed's group, that's been very instrumental in starting that as a town activity in 2 or 3 towns to date, hosting anybody who wants to come to welcome new people into town, especially important when you're talking about people of color. This is open to everybody. But especially important, when women are coming in to start or build new businesses, when they're coming in to join institutions that are ongoing, etc. So those are some of the ways, just the kind of top line things that communities can do to make the Declaration of Inclusion a really meaningful activity.
Well, thank you, Al. I appreciate the work you've put into this, the organization here, that this kind of planning is very helpful as we look to take our next steps and move forward, because the questions will come up. So what's next? And as I said earlier, we are in times where we need ways to come together. I think we've seen evidence in various incidences and meetings where it seems like we've forgotten how to be social creatures and how to be just exercise basic social skills. And I think we need practice. We need to relearn some of those skills. And this, I see this as a way, again, to bring people together and affirm, I think, what most of us already believe, but just affirm it so we don't forget and we can implement these pieces. I love the idea of a concierge committee to welcome people to town, especially people of color. What a wonderful way to do that. I remember we've had the welcome baby programs in Vermont. When there's a new family, they help welcome the baby with connections with people and ways to help. I love these ideas. So thank you so much, Al and Bob and your whole team. And I did want to share too, I had a great conversation with Betsy Bishop last week. She's the president of the Vermont Chamber of Commerce. And I wasn't aware that she was the one that set up your website for you. And she is on board with both feet to get the business community involved in this too. And I think that's what we need, because as she said, this is good for business.
Absolutely. We think it's key. We learned of Betsy. I mean, we knew of her, but after she did her goals for this year, we listened to what she said, and we listened to the governor when he did his State of the State talk. And it was very interesting because they talked about all the things the state needs to grow, and inclusion was a part of it, but inclusion was last. And Bob and I looked at that and listened to the words and said, inclusion's not last, inclusion is number one. You can't do all of these things without having people. And having people in this country means having people of every sex, every ethnic background, every race, etc. As Bob said earlier, the state is losing people. It is totally dependent upon having an environment which is safe, which is welcoming, which encourages people to come and stay and bring their families, which gives them support when they're here, moral support, emotional support, intellectual stimulation, et cetera, et cetera. So this is big. It's not, as Bob said, this is not just a moral thing to do. It is important. Downtowns in Vermont are dead on Saturday afternoon. There are vacant spaces up and down in just about every town, with the exception of the 3 or 4 largest towns in the state. And if those places are going to be viable, we've got to have people coming into the state. Either that or everybody on this program is going to have more babies.
Well, so thank you, Al. Isaac, did you have a question?
Unfortunately not. I was late and I need to head out now, but I just wanted to thank you for coming together and bringing us together.
Well, thank you. And I hope we can talk more about this in the future. And
Sounds good.
just so everybody knows, we are going to be moving out now into Windham County. We are coming to your town. We're coming to your church. We're coming to your group. We've got some good news to share. And I think we can bring people together, get those conversations going, and help make Vermont that welcoming and inclusive place we want it to be even more so. So unless there's any other questions or comments anybody wants to make, we can wrap up for today.
Just really want to thank you for putting this together, Mike. And we met with Frank Sadowski earlier on the same concept, and you could certainly be helpful in talking about what you're doing in Windham County to the other counties across the state and getting them to do similar things. That would be a great boost to this initiative.
Yep. Will do.
Thank you.
All right. Well, want to thank everybody again. And we will be.
Mike, Bill Schmidt has his hand up, Mike.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, Julie. Bill.
You got to unmute him.
Okay. In listening to what was said, a thought occurred to me. In Dummerston, in our spring Views of Dummerston quarterly newsletter, the inclusion piece will be part of that newsletter. But we're looking forward in September to having an end of summer party, which Catie, by the way, is heading up for Dummerston Cares and a number and other organizations in town, and also public bodies like the Board of Selectmen, Conservation Commission, Planning Commission, and so on. It's going to be a fun day for everybody in town. And maybe we have an opportunity in the way invitations are written to folks to come, because it's an everyone in town party, to use some of the language, inclusion language, to kind of spread the word and support the cause. That would be an interesting way to promote and encourage people to understand that Dummerston itself is diverse in many ways in its population, and something for us to think about. I'm sure Catie will take that into account as we prepare for that event. We had wanted to have it last September, but the pandemic got in the way, and so we're hoping to do that this year. So
those are just the kind of ideas we're looking for, Bill. So thanks. Catie?
Oh, just dovetailing on what Bill said, we are trying to be inclusive, and there's a whole wonderful committee. Meg is on the committee, Meg Lyons here. But anyway, we started out, well, how do we get everybody showing up? Well, we have a bike parade. And then we thought about it. Well, a bike, I mean, that's two wheels. That's maybe younger people. And then we decided to call it a wheels parade, so that we've got scooters and bikes and wheelchairs. And I said I'd carry my roll-on luggage. So, you know, everybody is invited. And that's how we're trying to look at every event.
Great. Thank you. That's another creative way to get this out. And we're going to be looking for ideas like this too, because we want to bring as many people into the fold as possible. So stay tuned. This work is just starting, and we're looking forward to spreading this good word. So thank you, everybody.